So I just wanted to start off to welcome everyone and to just acknowledge that today we are gathered virtually and connecting in so-called Northwest BC. We have three presenters today, and we are joining from our homes and workplaces located on the unceded traditional and ancestral territories of the Tsimshian and Gitxsan people. We take this moment to express sincere gratitude for the opportunity to gather on these traditional lands today and acknowledge that as settlers to this land, many of our practices and ways of knowing and being are inherently colonial. We recognize that acknowledging the land we meet on is not enough to heal injustice, but merely starting place to better understand, listen, strengthen, and empower Indigenous ways of being. So I'll go ahead and invite you to just quickly introduce yourself in the chat. If you wanted to pop your name, we'd love to hear hear about the land from which you're joining us today, and anything you'd like to share, maybe a little bit about your seed saving knowledge, or maybe what you're hoping to take away from the session today, or your favorite plant to grow, just a little something to share in the chat for folks to get to know each other a little bit better. So a little bit about the session. Today, we're going to be doing some community partner introductions. So as I mentioned, there are three of us who have partnered together for the Northwest Seed Library and to bring you the presentation today. So I'll tell you, we'll be talking a little bit about each community organization, and then we'll chat about the Northwest Seed Library and introduce you to the project and where it sits at the moment. Then Jolene of Short Season Seeds is going to be giving the seed saving presentation, which we're all really excited about. There'll be lots of time for questions. Jolene has made it well known that if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to interrupt and to jump in with questions, and then we'll have lots of time for questions after, followed by a quick poll to get a little bit of feedback and some follow-up. So I'm going to dive right on in and give you a quick introduction. We'll start with an introduction about Farm to School BC. So Farm to School BC is a program that's administered by the Public Health Association of BC. So we are a provincial program. And sort of the three core pillars of Farm to School that we aim to work for are bringing healthy local food into schools and building that connection, offering hands-on learning opportunities around food as it relates to schools and for students, and then strengthening those school and community connections. So often that looks like building connections between community organizations to schools or farms or other sort of places where food is grown, gathered, or collected. So as I mentioned, Farm to School BC is a provincial program. So we have been active for 14 years here in the province. With Farm to School BC, one of our primary ways that we connect and support schools is by offering grants. So we have given grants to over 271 schools across the province so far, which is sort of spread out over about 19 different school districts. So Farm to School BC is not a cookie cutter model. We really work with each school and community to sort of meet them where they are and to try and provide supports or fill in gaps in ways that are needed for each school and community. So in that sense, each Farm to School BC program looks really different. So these are just a few of the examples of what some schools have done with the funds that have been given by Farm to School BC to work on some of those three core pillars that I mentioned at the beginning, the connecting to healthy local food, the hands-on learning opportunities, and the building and strengthening school and community connections. So lots of really awesome and creative projects have come out of these grants. This is just a quick overview of our team. We do have hubs throughout the province, which I'll get to a little bit later, and then we're supported by a provincial team manager, a food literacy coordinator, and then our communications coordinator. We work really closely as well with the health authority area. So you'll see Amelia Malechkova here in the bottom left-hand corner, and she is our population health dietitian for school-age nutrition here in Northern Health. So we work really closely with her in the Northwest region when we're working with schools to ensure that our food literacy resources are sort of best practices, and we're getting the best possible and most up-to-date information out there when we're talking about food and food in the classroom and food in schools. So as I mentioned, Farm to School BC does support the whole province with our programming, but we have some specific hubs throughout the province where we actually have a regional animator, which is my role here in the Northwest. So Vancouver, Surrey, Kamloops, the Sunshine Coast, Central Island, the capital area around Victoria. We recently launched this year, we have a North Central region. Our animator is based in Prince George there, and then here in the Northwest, we have the Northwest Regional Hub. So the hub here in the Northwest, some of you may be familiar. I'm sure I've met quite a few of you in person already, but the hub was started in January of 2019. So it's been active for a few years now. We support public, private, independent, and Indigenous schools here within the Northwest. So that ranges all the way from Prince Rupert to Houston, encompassing sort of the general areas of School District 52, 82, and 54. But as I mentioned, we support all schools across that, whether they are within a school district or not. So we have a total of 20 funded farm to school projects that have happened here in the Northwest, which is really exciting. There's a whole bunch of different, this could be a whole other presentation on talking about what some of the schools have done with the funds and where they are now, but there's some really cool projects. There's some schools that are working to close the loop and growing food in their hallways that then get served in a salad bar program. And then we have some school gardens that are partnering with other community organizations. And then there's microgreens happening in classrooms. We have tower gardens. There's a whole bunch of different ways that farm to school projects are happening here in the Northwest, which is really exciting. So a little bit about sort of the Farm to School BC Northwest Hub at the moment. We are, as I mentioned, sort of my main role here as an animator is to support schools. So right now, sort of coming out of the pandemic, shifting into a new phase of the pandemic, I should say, and being able to see what's been happening here in the Northwest over the past couple of years. We have awarded 3 new Farm to School BC grants here in the 2021-2022 school year. So we're really trying to take this spring to celebrate everything that's happened. Teachers and schools have worked incredibly hard to make sure over the past couple of years, especially that schools are being connected to food and that students are still being fed despite some of the challenges and obstacles that are happening in schools and within communities and regional food at the moment. So it's been really incredible. So the Seeds of Celebration is sort of part of our Northwest Spring Celebration series that's kind of ongoing throughout this spring. So we do a couple different, we're celebrating sort of through a couple different ways. So first of all, through a pollinator award. So we had nominations opened and we had 4 schools nominated here in the Northwest. And these schools are just, the pollinator award is just sort of to recognize a school or a school champion for kind of buzzing around their area and trying to make their school a better place and support their farm to school program and pollinate sort of the region and help to spread some of the ideas of Farm to School BC. So that's really exciting. We had 4 schools nominated here in the Northwest, as I mentioned. We also do a partnership each year with West Coast Seeds. So we're partnering with West Coast Seeds again this year to be able to distribute seeds throughout the Northwest to different schools to use in their school garden or in their indoor growing. And then seed saving knowledge translation, which is what this presentation is certainly a part of to help build connections to community and to work on some seed saving initiatives here in the Northwest. I'll get to this a little bit later, but we do have seed planting parties with schools to help grow out seeds for the seed library. And then we're also offering Indigenous planting cards to some schools here in the Northwest as well in celebration. So that wraps up sort of the section on Farm to School BC. I think we have time for, does anyone have any questions about Farm to School BC specifically before we dive into learning a bit more about Ecotrust Canada and short season seeds? I can't really see everyone in the gallery, so maybe just unmute yourself if you have any questions. Otherwise, we'll keep rolling. Awesome. Okay, I will pass it over to Charles to chat a little bit about Ecotrust Canada.
Margo. So yes, like Margo said, I'm representing Ecotrust Canada here in Prince Rupert. Last year in 2021, we kind of decided to expand our work into the food realm, food systems, food security, and food sovereignty work here in the Northwest. So that involves several different kind of strategies within 2021, one of which my job is to implement urban agriculture in Prince Rupert. So we built a nice little urban farm downtown. And this brought me into contact with Margot and Farm School BC. Part of our strategy around producing food locally was to have a nice visible site of urban agriculture and then to engage the community. And where Margot came in was we were trying to bring people in, and one of the real responses that was strong was from the schools in town. So when Margot came to us late last year with the opportunity to partner with Short Season Seeds and Farm School BC on the seed library, we jumped at the chance, of course. So my role within the Northwest Seed Library will be to house the seeds in the Prince Rupert office, work with the schools to implement their growing season, implement the seeds for the library into their gardens, grow them out, and then help them to return. And then once we implement, Margot will go into this in more detail, and Jolene as well, of course. Once we delve into the proper sharing in the next season, my job then will be to distribute and receive seeds as well to the larger region. And then also, Margot, I think, is going to share a link. I've created a little photo book for us to follow along. This is just where we're working in the high school greenhouse here, which is a nice heated greenhouse, and they've kindly allowed us to come in and grow seedlings for this project, as well as for the schools around town in their gardens. Not only the seed library, but their general growing program as well. So we distribute the seedlings around town to the schools and others as well. So the photo book will contain the work in the greenhouse, some of the seedlings we're growing, and pictures of the seeds. So please feel free to follow along as we progress through the project throughout the year. And that's it for me, and I'll pass it along to Jolene.
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'll just load up my presentation. How's that? Can you see my slides or can you see my whole screen?
We can see your whole screen with notes and everything, Jolene.
Okay. Let me try that again. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much to Margot and Charles for kind of getting the ball rolling on this project and making it all happen. It's really exciting to have a seed library coming to the region. I know there are definitely a lot of seed savers around and some small seed libraries, but you know, keeping them active and alive is really an important part of it. So it's great to see some energy going into saving seeds. Thanks for having me. So a little bit about me. My background is in biology. I worked in aquatic wetlands doing biodiversity surveys. And then I did my master's on insect pest in apples, a caterpillar, and have been farming at WoodGrain Farm for the last 7-8 years, doing market gardening, but slowly incorporating more and more seed crops. And now I grow seeds for the BC Eco Seed Co-op. So we're a collective of farmers that, rather than each of us try to have our own small company, we try to focus on a few varieties that we can market collectively together, and then we can increase the number of varieties we are growing, because you can only grow so many of one species at a time. Yeah, so that's kind of my background and what got me here. Just a really strong passion for growing seeds, being inspired by a lot of the other seed keepers in the region and in the co-op as well. So this is kind of what I'll just cover today, but I'm also very open to talking about anything folks are interested in, so feel free. I don't know if I can see the chat right now, but I don't mind if you want to jump in or put something in the chat, and I'll try to leave lots of time for questions and discussion. but if I carry on, then just interrupt me or stop me. And I'll just jump right into it. So the big why of saving seeds to me is a really important one. If you go to the seed catalog these days, you're only going to see a few varieties of each crop. Corn is a really great example of this. That snapshot on the photo is just a fraction of the number of corn varieties that are out there. But what we see in the catalogs and what's being grown on a large scale is, just a very small amount of seed. And the more we lose these ancient varieties, the more we risk losing traits that are resistant to climate change and resilient in our changing climate. Same thing with grains and potatoes and vegetables. The graph on the bottom is an indication of kind of how the number of varieties keeps decreasing in catalogs over time. So that one's for cabbage.
Jolene, sorry, I don't think the slides are keeping up with for me at least, it's still on the welcome page on the first slide. Is that the same for others? Okay, yeah, I don't think it's keeping up with your.
Okay. So is it on?
Now it's on the why save seeds slide.
Okay.
Yeah,
great.
But it's not in full screen. We still see the slides down the left and then the notes, which is fine. You can still see lots, but up to you.
Let's see here. Let me just try to open this. Maybe I'll take presenter view off. Okay, how's that? Okay, so yeah, just let me know. So we're on the next slide now. This should show you some funny looking graphs. And just further to the point of how important it is that we save more seeds within our communities. Most of our seed supply, this is particularly the case with, major cash crops like corn and soy, sugar beets, and all of these things. That seed supply is very much controlled by 3 corporations. You can see 4 on here, but 2 of them, like Bayer and Monsanto, have merged. So even if we wanted to grow seed that we saved ourselves, there isn't even enough of a supply out there. But on a local level, like for vegetable production, like we can do it. We can save our own and have our own security. What we've seen floating around and chatting about a lot is how you can't have food sovereignty without seed sovereignty. Like we need seeds to be able to grow food. On the right, you'll see kind of again like how the diversity hasn't decreased over time. So one of the more resilient crops is actually tomatoes, because a lot of people have continued to save tomatoes and different varieties and experiment a lot, but we're losing a lot of like the brassicas, the peas, radishes. Like there's a very slim pickings if you go to the catalog, and what you see in the catalog mostly these days is hybrids, and you can't really get, well, you can save seed from hybrids, but you won't get what you planted. And we'll talk a bit more about that.
Jolene, I'm just going to interrupt again. Sorry, it's still not changing the slides. Maybe do you want to stop sharing and I'll try sharing on my end, and then you can just let me know when to change the slides. Let's try that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then further to the importance of saving seeds is also seed saving for. Let's see here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I also just want to mention, remembering where our seed is coming from and who's been stewarding seed over time. And there's a really important movement for seed rematriation, which is about bringing seed back home, the act of like bringing seeds and foods and food traditions that many of which have been lost through colonization in Indigenous communities. Tiffany Travers in Swain territory is doing some amazing work, and Rowan White is a very inspiring seed rematriation leader that I really recommend looking into. And she kind of quotes that when a seed is rematriated, it is not owned by its community of origin, rather it re-enters into a reciprocal relationship with that community. And another thing I've heard her say is that like the seeds don't belong to us, they belong to our grandchildren. And so it's just really important to know that we are stewards of this seed and we don't want to lose them. But if you're interested in learning more about that, I recommend checking out these two and more. Yeah. So to save seeds, what do you need? Vegetable seed production is super variable. So there's no like one way of doing anything. So basically just start with a goal of what you want to save and what you want to try. You need a little bit of basic plant information, some space, bit of equipment, and a lot of patience, and a lot of sieves. and fans and tarps are really helpful too. Next slide. So some of the science, the plant families are where the main place you want to focus if you want to save a seed crop is first to find out what genus and species it is. If you're worried about crossing, for instance. So if you look at pumpkin and squash, they're both Cucurbita maxima. So even though they look completely different, they're very related. And if they're growing next to each other, a bee will take the pollen from one plant, take it to the other plant, and it'll cross. Here you've got two kale plants, which are actually in different species. So you can grow them side by side and they won't cross. So if you're unsure and you're worried about crossing, Wikipedia is actually a really great resource. It has this whole list of like kingdom to species. So you can always check to see it's okay to grow two species next to each other, but if they're the same species, they will cross. And some things cross more than others.
Jolene, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
When it comes to cross-pollination, when does it become an issue? I'm delving into this myself at the moment. Like starting seedlings, is it a factor then? Do you have to consider this as the seedlings are just starting out, or does it just become a factor as the pollination is starting to happen?
Yeah, well, it's more of a factor of when you harvest that seed, so the following year. So you can grow whatever you want together until you get to the point of the flowering stage, and that's when you can risk crossing genetics.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can go to the next slide. I'll talk a bit more about cross-pollination and crops that do cross-pollinate. So just a good overview there. You often hear, talk of like heirloom varieties, open-pollinated, and hybrids. So the seeds that we're saving seed from are going to be open-pollinated varieties, and that means that they're going to be true to their parent. They're going to look like the same thing you planted. In the case of an heirloom, that definition is kind of that it's a variety that existed for about 100 years or more. So something that where the genetics have been preserved and passed down from generation to generation. A hybrid, on the other hand, is a variety that has two very different parents. So if you look at that picture of corn, the hybrid is the plant in the middle and the two parents are on the side. So what happens when you save seed from that hybrid plant is you're going to get a mix of the parent genetics, and often the parents are very inbred. They're bred, heterozygous or homozygous for certain traits so that you get all the traits you want in that offspring, but then the next generations are going to be mixed. Sometimes seed companies label things as hybrid just so people won't try saving them. So it doesn't mean you can't save seed from a hybrid. You can also dehybridize hybrid seed. You can just, it might take 7 years to get it to be a stable population of something you want. It can be done, but it's much harder. So open pollinated seeds are the ones we really want to work with, and that's where we have the shared genetics. Hybrid parent lines are often very proprietary, so that the people who develop them are the ones who can control them and profit from them. And they have a lot of value. I mean, they are very productive, resilient crops for farmers who need reliable production. So what we want is for there to be more open pollinated seeds out there. So the more people saving seeds and carrying seeds through and testing them in our climate and all of that is really helpful. Any questions about hybrids or heirlooms? Okay, I'll move on.
Sorry, I do have a question. So heirloom seeds aren't necessarily open pollinated. You have to still check like that they are.
No, heirlooms are open pollinated.
Okay. Great, perfect. Thank you.
Definitely they are. Yeah. Heirlooms are just ones that a variety that's been around for, over 100 years. Whereas an open pollinated is just kind of, yeah. You could have a new variety that's open pollinated where you crossed two heirlooms together, but now that it's a new variety, it's not an heirloom anymore.
Great, thank you.
Which is fun too, though. Like heirlooms are really amazing. They hold a lot of the genetics we need, but experimenting and crossing and breeding is also another exciting avenue to kind of keep building those genetics into stronger and more climate adapted species. Go to the next. Yeah, so some little quick botany, which I'm sure we've all seen once in a while through high school, university, here and there. But when we're looking at flowers, there can be a couple different types. So there's perfect flowers, which have both the male and female parts. And then there's also imperfect flowers where some will be male, some will be female, such as squash. Also spinach, there's male plants and female plants when you're growing up spinach. So just kind of understanding whether you're working with plants that have all the parts or whether they have different parts. They call it being monoecious when it's in the same house, or dioecious when you have male and female in separate houses. That can also be on the same plant. So squash has male and female flowers on the same plant, whereas spinach has males and females on different plants. You see that in the wild as well, which is really cool. I recently discovered that cottonwoods have male and female trees. So some cottonwood trees only produce pollen, and other cottonwood trees produce the female fluffy seeds. Crazy. Yeah, and of course, pollination is when you get the transfer of pollen. So from the male part to the female part, and to go into the ovary to produce your seed. So that needs to happen in order for seed to develop. And of course, the seeds the material. Next slide. So some important things to think about with crops is whether you're working with an annual, a biennial, or a perennial. So if you want to save seeds from something, if you want to get it in the same season, you're going to be working with annuals. If you're patient and ready and you have the things you need to do a biennial, then you'll need a couple years. So carrots are biennial, beets, lots of the brassicas are, like kale, often I'm sure in like Terrace and Rupert, and even around here in the Kispioks and Smithers, you'll see kale coming back. And when it comes back, it always goes straight into flower. So that's an opportunity to save some seed. Perennials sometimes produce seed every year. Yeah, you see this more in flowering crops. I don't work with a lot of perennial vegetables off the top of my head, but chives, fiddleheads, asparagus, good examples there. Next slide. And then the other question we're looking at is, how is it pollinated? We've got a picture here. That's actually a watermelon. That's insect pollinated, squash, brassicas. So if something's insect pollinated, you need to keep it far away from other varieties of that species that a bee could transfer pollen in. So that distance is usually about 1 mile at least. If you have like forest and other vertical barriers, you're pretty well set. But if it's a flat field, you might want to give that a bit more distance. Wind pollination, you see that grain is wind pollinated, so is spinach, corn. When you're working with crops that are wind pollinated, it's also really good to grow them in blocks rather than in like a long line. It gives the plants more opportunity for the pollen to land on the female parts. Self-pollination, these crops are the easiest to get true seed from because they're less likely to cross. Not to say they can't ever cross, and tomatoes are a good example here. So most tomatoes are self-pollinating. You get a tomato, you save the seed, you'll probably get the same tomato. But the odd time a bee can get in there, and depending on the variety, like some of the heirlooms actually are more like a potato flower, and the female part is sticking out and not as likely to self-pollinate. The other way to pollinate crops is by hand. Because squash is so proboscis, I guess you could say. We grow a lot of the maxima, the pumpkins, the kabochas, and all of those, but I still want to get seeds. So in order to prevent crossing, I go out at night and I tape the flowers closed, and then in the morning I hand pollinate them and tape them closed again. And this is just to avoid letting any bees get in there to mix up the pollen. If a bee gets into the plant while you're hand pollinating, then you just have to move on and try again. Next slide. So some examples of self-pollinating crops, which are really great for starting out seed saving, are things like tomatoes, lettuce, beans, peas. Again, you still want to keep maybe like 5-meter distance or so between your crops, or at least keep an eye out for crossing. You might get if they do cross, you might get something new and interesting, so that's okay too. The ones that aren't self-bearers though, the crossers are the ones you have to watch out for, whether they're wind or insect pollinated. So that's a lot of things. Yeah, onions, cucumbers, corn, carrots, beets, broccoli. The main thing is to know that if you're just starting out, you might want to start with something that self-pollinates. And crossers, they're easy too. You just have to make sure you only have one species at a time, unless you're experimenting. Next slide. The other important factor for seed production, especially at scale, so because I sell to the BC Eco Seed Co-op and to a small seed company, I want to make sure I'm keeping as much of the genetic material in the plant as possible. So I don't want to save seed from just one plant. That doesn't mean you can't save seed from one plant. By all means, you can. It's just good to keep notes on that because you perhaps lost some of the characteristics of that variety. I think it does happen though over time, like with heirlooms, if they start to get lost, then it might be a pretty small population that the genetics came from. But for example, like arugula, in order to kind of have genetic preservation, you want to have over 80 plants. But to just have viable seed, you need 5 plants. So don't let population size be a hindrance, but it is good to keep notes on how many plants you got seed from, just for reference. What I often do when I'm planting a larger seed crop is that even if I've got my own seed that I've saved and it came from a good sized population, if I have seed from another seed company of that variety too, or a couple seed companies, I'll grow them all together. I'll pick out the best plants. And so I'm making sure I'm keeping as much genetic diversity in the crop as possible. The seed saving guide is available online. If you just Google like seed saving chart, seed matters, then and maybe we can post that into the chat. It's a super quick, easy guide that you can just check to be like, okay, is this an annual or perennial? How is it pollinated? What should my isolation distance be if it's a crosser? And how big my population be? A really great quick reference. Next slide. Here's a few kind of more examples of crops you can grow if you're just starting out or if you're looking for more of a challenge. For instance, I can talk a little bit more about carrot seed production. I grew a crop out last year, started out with, probably 400 carrots that I got the stecklings from someone else. The steckling is just basically the overwintered carrot. Lost a bunch to slugs, selected the best ones out of there, and ended up at the end of the day with 100 plants. So it's a long process, and there's a lot of steps along the way where you might lose plants. So if you need a population of, say, 40 plants, you probably want to start with like 80 plants so that you're left with 40 of your best plants and surviving plants. Flowers are a whole other realm, Margot. Flower seed production is actually like there's a lot of unknowns there. Germination is a lot trickier. I shouldn't say there's unknowns, like you can save seed from flowers, of course, but there are some more challenges to like getting the seed to germinate and that kind of thing. Any questions about specific crops? I'm going to give a few examples of like, growing a crop out, but feel free to ask any questions. And go to the next. Oh, I should mention actually, if you go back to that slide, some of those are highlighted as notes, like some concerns. So like basil, it says D2M, so the days to maturity is really long for a seed crop for basil. I've tried growing it here before and I was not successful. I thought, you know, if I let the basil go to flower after I kicked it a bit, I could get a little bit, dedicate some plants to seed, and I never had enough time. So if you are trying to grow something like basil with our short season, you really have to start those plants like extra early and get them in the ground. So that is a limitation up here with our short season. Other crops I find challenging up here are lettuce. It's an easy crop to get seed from, but if it's growing outside and it's raining on and off in the fall when you want to harvest, it's really prone to getting moldy and dusty, and it's just kind of and it's a really hard crop to clean. It's not hard to get seed from, and it, you know, by all means still do it, but that is a added challenge to being in a climate where we can get a bit wetter in the fall. Next slide.
Jolene, I just have a quick question about that. Are there, with the difference in the seasons that we have here, are there, like, if folks want to grow in their greenhouse or like in an indoor sort of space, are there special considerations for that?
Yeah, and well, it's a good practice probably for some crops like that. If you're growing something that you're worried about the days to maturity, then growing in a greenhouse is a good way to sort of get around that. I was growing in a greenhouse when I tried basil, so it wasn't quite enough. Now that we have a bit more of a, like, we have a prop house, a passive solar greenhouse, I might have a bit more luck. Yeah, you do still have to watch for humidity levels in greenhouses, of course. And you also have to remember that your plants are going to get really big. So if you're growing like a kale that has overwintered in your greenhouse, make sure it's going to have enough room and not start touching the sides of the roof. And yeah, make sure, again, because of that, moisture is your enemy when it comes time to harvest your seeds. You don't want them to get wet when they're mature. So yeah, other things to consider are spacing. You're going to need a lot more space for a seed crop than you do for a plant that you're going to eat. And again, that's because they often get quite large. You know, a kale plant can probably be like 4 feet high or more as they just keep growing and growing. And you want the plant to have as much room as possible so it has lots of nutrients and it can put lots of energy into good high quality seed. The bigger the seed, not necessarily, like, the bigger the seed is a good indicator of having good quality. So the more space, the more energy that each plant can put into its seed, rather than have a bunch of really close plants together that are kind of competing. You want good aspect, good soil. You don't want it to get too rich so that they're, you know, they need the energy to go to full maturity. The other big consideration with seed production up here is, again, like, starting early, and knowing that that crop is going to be in the ground all season long. So it's a commitment. Keeping the beds free of weeds is not only important for competition, but also because you don't want to introduce weed seed into your seed. Something like bindweed is a really bad one to watch for because it'll climb up your crop, and then when you go to harvest, and if the weed seeds are similar in size to your seed crop, they're going to be really hard to clean out. A lot of crops require staking, if or they'll fall over, and, you know, it's manageable, but it can be a bit of extra work if you want to kind of, you know, stake 100 feet of something. If you just got a few plants, then a few, you know, sticks in the ground or tomato cages work great too. Yeah, just general planting, like, you know, transplanting on cloudy days is good. Keep things watered in while they're getting established. I often get asked, like, whether it's good to stress plants out, or we talked about this a bit, and it can be interesting to kind of select crops that have been put to the test. Like, around here, you can test overwintering crops to see if they survive the winter, and those can be some good traits to preserve, drought tolerance and those kind of things. But you do also want to make sure the plant has the energy and the nutrients it needs to grow. And yeah, and labeling, of course, you know, again, population size, where that original seed came from, because the original seed is also just an important thing to remember. Next slide. And as for supplies, the most important supplies, because of the diversity of seed crops, I find are just to have bins and bags, tarps, remay. Basically, your best friend when it comes time to clean seed is going to be fans and tarps and screens. And you can go to the thrift store and buy colanders. We could talk a little bit more about seed equipment. Yeah, and then of course learning what your mature seed is going to look like and what your plant is going to look like when the seed is mature. And that'll, if it's a brassica, it's going to have really dry brown pods. With beans, they should have a lot of time to dry off, and they should be colored by the time you open them. Be really careful when you're moving seed around that you're not mixing, of course. Seeds need to dry before you put them into storage, so never put your seed into like a glass jar right away because you'll end up with mold. It's good to have some sort of humidity monitor, or even if you put the seeds, lay them out to dry in an environment where it's not in the sun, but in somewhere where there's good airflow and low humidity. And then you can use you can use silica pouches if you want some further drying, or if you're really sure that it's good and dry at that point, then you can put it into airtight storage. If it's long-term storage, you're better off using glass than plastic, because plastic can let moisture in over time. Seeds can last for a really long time under good storage conditions, depending on the variety. Yeah, let's go on. Let's get into some seed crops. So there's different ways of harvesting seed. They kind of fit into two main categories of like wet seed processing and dry seed. So tomatoes, for example, are a wet seed crop. And the great thing about tomatoes is that they're seed crops you can get the seed from and eat them at the same time. So the seeds are ready at the same time as the fruit. So highly recommend saving tomato seeds. The seeds don't shatter, so you don't have to worry about the seed just falling on the ground when it's ready. And the rain doesn't really get in and interfere with the seed. It might interfere with the plant, but so for saving tomato seeds, you can ferment them, but you can also just dry them. That coating is a bit of a germination inhibitor. So if you don't ferment them, it might take a little bit longer to germinate, but they will still germinate. But if you give them a quick ferment, like a few days, I put all the tomatoes and juice into like a bowl, maybe add a little bit of water if it's not very watery seed, and then wait until it kind of starts to form almost like a scum. And then once you start to see things happening in there, you can stir it around and then add a bunch of water, and you'll see that all the good seed will float to the bottom. And any kind of
You just got really, really quiet.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
That's better.
Yeah, so the good seed will sink to the bottom of the water, so you can pour off all the flesh and any floating seed that isn't fully mature. And once you're down to just seed, you strain it, lay it out to dry, and you've got yourself tomato seed. Next slide. Cucumbers are also another crop that's considered like wet seed. So again, they're in a fleshy fruit. Unfortunately, with cucumbers, when you collect the seed, the fruit isn't very good to eat anymore. It's quite bitter. Cucumbers get really huge. These are pickling cucumbers, and they get to the size of like small melons. But you get seed out of it. So you scoop the seed. Again, you can let it ferment, and that'll help improve germination the following year. And again, using the decanting method where you're adding water and straining, and eventually you're left with just good heavy seed. Then once it's good and dry, you can put it into storage. And then so dry seed. So this is probably what we're more used to seeing in the garden, especially something like kale. If it's overwintered, it forms these siliques. It's ready when it starts to turn brown. And a good note is that your best seed is usually like the first seed to mature. So you don't want to necessarily, as soon as it starts dropping seed or shattering, you want to get in there and harvest. The other seed on the plant may not be fully mature, but you'll be able to clean that off with your fans or whatever other cleaning methods you have. But the best quality seed is actually the first seed to mature on a plant. And a lot of seeds mature sequentially, like brassicas or spinach. So the seed will grow from the like bottom up to be the most mature to the least mature. So you're going to have to kind of clean it out and harvest when as much as possible is mature. And someone just asked about the third picture, and that's a picture of that is actually Dijon mustard. It's a very similar pod to a brassica, to kale or arugula. It's a bit of a fuzzier pod, so it is a bit of a funny looking plant, and that's not quite ready yet. It's still green, so once that turns brown is when, and once the leeks start to like break open, that's when you know it's ready. And it's the nice thing about dry seeded crops is they're like brassicas specifically, they're very easy to clean because the leeks are a very different shape from the seed. Whereas something like carrots, the umbels, all the little stems are very similar in size to the seed. And so that can become very hard to separate. That's something to consider. And if you're just saving seed for a small scale, that may not be so important. But of course, if you need it to be like the highest quality possible and as clean as possible, that can be a little bit more work. Okay. We can go to the next slide. Squash are a good one because I know a lot of, you have your winter squash and it's like, oh, cool, like maybe I'll save the seed from this. A lot of times this is where you end up with an experiment. If you save seed from a squash without knowing what was growing around it, you will quite often get crossing, especially in the Maxima family or the pepo. So Cucurbita pepo is your zucchini, your delicatas are in that family, patty pan squash, acorn squash are all pepos and they all cross. And then the maximas are like your kabochas, your pumpkins. So yeah, just check your species, and if you're not hand pollinating or if you're not watching that, you'll probably get a cross, and you can definitely grow it out and see what you get. Often you might get something that's, from what I hear, I haven't experimented with this, but they often aren't the greatest when you get crosses. It's very rare to get something amazing, but not to say you never will. There's definitely, that's how we get new squash. So yeah, we talked about kind of the male and female flowers, having good isolation distances. The population size for squash is to have about 40 plants. So that's a pretty tricky one. I try to hand pollinate from, like, when I'm hand pollinating, I'll take the male one plant and give it to the female and another plant and mix enough genetics in the population as possible. But I do squash pretty much on a smaller scale because we focus mostly on squash for our market garden. Yeah. Let's see. When you cut, there's just a question that when you've cut your plants and some of the seed is still maturing. I haven't had issues with pests eating the plants, but the problem with the immature seed is that it tends to be more wet. And so you need to make sure you can dry off your seed as fast as possible. And if you have a lot of green seed, that can be a little harder. Yeah, so it depends on the seed, if you can kind of get that immature seed separated or not. You definitely have to watch out for rodents and birds. If you can put screens over things. I haven't had many issues. Rodents definitely can be a problem for your seed in storage. So another good reason not to use just Ziploc bags. You definitely want a container that will keep the rodents out.
Jolene, I have a question about squash.
Yeah.
When you're storing squash, you're curing them and storing them for the season. Let's say you get into it a couple months later, is the seed still viable at that point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and I think in fact, it's good to leave the seed in the squash for a couple months after curing. or a month or so. I think it's about like a month after you put your seed into storage. That's kind of when you want to harvest. And I don't know, I think I would guess that that gives it a bit more time to kind of fully mature in the plant.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. But even if you had a squash that you had all winter that you hadn't taken the seed out of, you could probably take it out in the spring and still plant it. Maybe others have seen this too, where you've overwintered a squash and in the spring you open it up and you can see that the seed has started to sprout inside. So that seeds want to grow, and you know that's their natural life cycle, is to stay in that plant and wait till the next season until it starts to rot into the ground and sprout up to life again. So yeah. Any other questions about just the crops we've gone through so far? Squash are definitely a really interesting one. Just because of all the potential for crossing, there's just too many fun varieties to grow. So it's too hard to pick just one. The one squash variety that I do just grow one of that I don't have to hand pollinate is butternut squash. It's in the Cucurbita moschata family, which are harder to grow in the north. They're more tropical, more heat loving. So I only grow one type, a mini butternut. And then that's the one crop, at least I don't have to worry about crossing. And so you can do that with the others too. Like maybe you just like one kind of zucchini and you avoid growing any other cucurbita peppos. Yeah, we can keep going. Yeah, so I talked a little bit about lettuce. It's not my favorite seed crop just because it's so hard to clean. And the other growers in the co-op are much better at growing it than I am. They have those nice dry falls and summers and don't have to deal with, you know, just a little bit of rain and it can get a little bit moldy, and it's still fine, but it's just it's very dusty. So just an important note there when you are cleaning seed that PPE is important, like wearing masks, and 95 masks is a highly recommended self-pollinator, so you don't need a lot of distance between plants. Actually, I have an experiment lettuce growing this year that I got from Farmer Cam when we were down there for the farm tour. It's actually, how do I say this? It's patented variety, so technically you're not, I can't save it and sell it or anything, but I'm still curious to see if I can get some seed out of it and just give it back to Cam. It's one of those like cut and come again lettuces, and they're very hard to get seed from, but his overwintered, so I think that will hopefully be enough to like trigger it to bolt this year. So we'll see. Next slide. Yeah, so just a little like overview of types of equipment that's out there. As I mentioned, all you really need are some screens. Tarps and fans are your friend. You can get, if you need finer cleaning for things like carrot and lettuce, the co-op and the farm folk, city folk have built this thing called a air separator, also known as the sticky, which does a really good job of cleaning seed, and there are things online to build one. We haven't gotten around to it yet here, but I'd love to see more seed equipment in the north, and hopefully with kind of the more seed libraries and more seed action, we can maybe try to develop more of a tool library up here. The second picture is a chicken plucker, which is a good way for threshing seed. And the third picture is kind of what you'll most commonly see, but hopefully wearing a mask, just using some box fans and a couple bins. So your heavy seed will drop into the first bin and your lighter seed and chaff will go into the second bin, but you want to have a backup bin there just in case you get a big gust of wind. Yeah. So that's how I most commonly save seed. Traditionally too, like you can just use the wind on a nice, like with a steady breeze. It's very relaxing to stand outside and just pour your seed and let the chaff go into the wind, and then just hope there aren't any big gusts. Next slide. And I know I've been talking with Margot and Charles a bit about, you know, dreamy equipment we could have for the library. So, you know, on a thresher level, there's this one machine called All Crop, which has been known to be quite good for vegetable production. I don't know of any around even in the province. They're more of an American down in old farms down there. Threshers, any way you can thresh the seeds, the better. We mostly just use tarps and our feet. So there's nothing like, children are wonderful for threshing. They love to bounce and jump on things. So a good resource. Greens, these are hopefully going to be available through the Northwest Seed Library. These are seed screens from Seedboro. There's going to be a variety of sizes. So the more kind of sizes you can have to either remove your chaff or, you know, separate your seed from the other seed, the better. And so that's going to be a pretty exciting set to have available when it comes time to clean seeds in the fall. This is another fancy machine that does that winnowing for you instead of standing there with your bins and your fan. This is kind of a does it all machine. Very cool, and the developer is happy to share the design and how to grow it or how to build it. Next slide. There is actually one in the north of those winnow wizards. The Seed the North has purchased one. So I'll be curious to go and hopefully try it out this year. And there is a mobile seed cleaner unit. If you're not familiar, it hasn't made it to this region yet, so we kind of need our own. But maybe we can convince them to come this far, but they have a lot of these machines, and it's, yeah, rather than everyone who's saving seeds investing in this equipment, like this mini clipper on the right, which is just basically like sets of screens and shakers and fans, that does it all for you to get really to grade your seed into like 3 different grades. It's about $5,000, and yeah, lots of big investments there. Next slide. And also just an important thing on quality of seed. So if you want to make sure your seed crop has been successful, then a good way to test it out is to do a germination test. Roll it up in some, this is actually specific germination paper, but any kind of like a thick paper towel will do. Of course, for our seed that we're selling through retailers and seed companies, we have to make sure it meets the minimum standard for germination, and that varies according to the crop. Some are high germination, some others they can accept a lower level. Yeah, but I should also mention that it's not just about germination. There's also seed vigor that you're looking for. So you might have old seed and you think, okay, let me see if this seed is any good, and it might germinate, but it might still be kind of slow, and that's because it's lost its vigor. So it might still grow, but once you lose that, it's never going to be as strong of a plant. So that's where you get down to like having good seed storage and maintaining your good quality. A good way to do that too is when you're storing your seed, keep some of your best seed and leave it in storage, and the seed you're going to be kind of grabbing and using all the time, keep in a different container so that you're not removing it in and out of storage a lot. Next slide. Yeah, hopefully that I didn't go on for too long. Here are some resources. So this is the Susan Ashworth book. It's kind of like the best little technical guide for quickly being like, is Mizuna related to bok choy? You can just go in here and check like which species of the brassicas are all going to cross with each other. I use it all the time. I also have the John Navazio organic seed grower. So kind of a bit more into like the production, like when would I plant this and what does it need and what should the spacing be? A good book as well. And one that hopefully you can get it through the Interlibrary Connect, but it would be great if one of the local libraries also stocked it. Lots of other great books out there and websites, Seed Savers Exchange, the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, Seed Change. If people are looking for mentorship opportunities, check out Farm Folk City Folk. They're very active with their mobile cleaning unit and supporting the Northwest Seed Library. They've been a really great resource, and they're doing lots of really great things with breeding and seed production. So definitely check out Farm Folk City Folk if you're not already on their email list. And yeah, another plug, I guess, would be to support your local seed economy. So buy seed from seed that's being grown locally, and not just from us, but from like other amazing small seed companies in BC. There's so many. There's Salt Spring Seeds, there's Full Circle Seeds, there's all these amazing small companies. Many of the members of the BC Eco Seed Co-op. So yeah, if we want more seed locally, we need to buy seed that's produced locally. And yeah, I want to leave. I have more slides on like carrot seed production, but I wanted to leave time for more discussion rather than carry on, so I don't get too far off topic. So if there's any questions, let me know.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jolene. We definitely have lots of time for questions. So if anyone wants to pop something in the chat, or you have some specific questions for Jolene, feel free to unmute yourself and we'll give some space for that.
And I think the remaining slides, I think I had just a bit of an overview of biennial seed production. So if there aren't any burning questions, I can go through those those slides on growing carrots. So if anyone has carrots growing in, or not growing, but carrots in the root cellar right now, if they came from an open pollinated carrot that you planted last year, then you could potentially put those carrots back into the ground now and get a seed crop out of them. Yeah, there's still time. The only tricky thing to watch for when you're kind of pulling stuff out of the root cellar is to make sure you've selected the best carrots. Often when we're farming, we'll go through and pick all the biggest carrots and sell them, and what's left for the root cellar is sometimes smaller carrots. So that's why last year I ended up carrots from a different farm, because they were open pollinated and a variety that they wanted. But also because, they were still in the ground. They were from a farm down south. So I was able to select all of that whole section. I'll let Margot answer about if there's a seed library in the north, or Charles.
Yeah, this is actually a really great segue, Cheryl. Thank you so much for your question in the chat about, is there a seed library in the north right now? I can share a little bit of information here. Let me just bring up the PowerPoint again. So there are actually quite a few seed libraries in the north that are popping up. I know Prince George just started one. I think there's one in Burns Lake. There are quite a few popping up in the north, which is really exciting to see, as Jolene mentioned, like if we want to have the seed sovereignty and to have more sort of regionally appropriate seeds, that has to start somewhere. So that is a really great segue introducing the Northwest Seed Library. So we've alluded to it sort of throughout the whole presentation, but this is a new project that's a partnership here between Farm to School BC, PHABC, Short Season Seeds, and Ecotrust Canada. So the Northwest Seed Library, it's just in its sort of infancy stages. So we started here in 2022. We started getting together and we wrote a grant to get the initial funding for the project from the Northern Health Authority. So it's very much, like I said, sort of a still young project, and it's very living, there's lots of growing, there's lots of sort of new developments all the time as we sort of work to figure out how it's going to work best here in the Northwest. So for now, the library is housed at Ecotrust, the Ecotrust office in Prince Rupert with Charles, which is really exciting. So he is going to be sort of keeping the seeds and maintaining the seed database. So folks across the Northwest, eventually, once it's up and running, will be able to go on the database and to request certain seeds. If you're not in the Prince Rupert area, seeds can be mailed throughout the Northwest. So as I mentioned, right now we're in the first year. So our sort of main priorities for this year are building up the seed stock. So we've been accepting donations of unique and uncommon seeds that do well here in the Northwest climate. So we've had some really generous donations from Farm Folk City Folk and their farm, as well as Short Season Seeds and WoodGrain Farm. Jolene has been really generous in donating some seeds that she's been saving, as well as some other folks. So we're always open to accepting donations of some of those unique and open pollinated varieties, as Jolene was mentioning. This year, we're partnering with a few different schools throughout the Northwest as well, to have it sort of as a learning and hands-on opportunity for students to get to dive in and be a part of this project. So we're partnering with several different schools to plant the crops in school gardens. And then Jolene will be going in the fall and doing workshops with the students to harvest the seeds, process and clean the seeds. And then the schools are welcome to keep as much seed as they like, and whatever they have extra and left over will be put back into the seed library. So we're working at the moment to sort of build up some partnerships with folks who are happy to grow out seed and can help with a bit of space in growing out the seed to make sure we have a viable stock each year. As Jolene mentioned, we're also working on collecting tools and supplies in hopes that we have like a bit of a tool library that we can be using here in the Northwest. Like she mentioned, Farm Folk City Folk has that awesome mobile seed cleaner, but it doesn't usually come up here to the north. So it would be really nice if we could start to build our own collection that we could share sort of throughout the Northwest area and have folks be able to use it and clean their own seed. The online database is being built as well, so you can see what seed is going to be available. It's sort of a work in progress at the moment. So once that's available, we'll certainly be sharing that out. And then we're, of course, actively seeking additional funding to help grow the project and to help with the sustainability piece. So in future years, like I mentioned, we will have seeds available for schools, community gardens, and home gardeners to borrow and plant and use the seed, and then collect any seed back to return to the library if it ends up that you have some extra in your garden. We're hoping to do ongoing workshops and events, partner for Seedy Saturdays, that kind of thing, to be able to, again, strengthen that sort of community connection and to just offer education around seeds and saving seeds and seeds in the Northwest. The seed saving tool sharing, which I mentioned, continuing to increase the seed stock, and then, of course, ongoing collaborations and partnerships. Okay. Let me just, I think that, yeah, so that is that. So that's a quick introduction to the seed library. I see another question has popped up. I have just started saving seed. Would I test my seed to see if it's any good then? So this would be a question for Jolene.
I'm not sure, like, if you save seed from last year. It's a good way to test it is to even just start to plant some. And one way I kind of double check my germ tests is to just fill my transplants at this time of year. I'm like, I tested the germination, but hey, now I'll get to check it again. Oh, to donate to the seed library. Yeah, that's a great question. If we haven't really talked about a protocol for testing the seed coming in through the seed library. It's probably something we'll have to kind of revisit as we start bulking up seeds. It would definitely be helpful if you did test your seed before, so that you, especially if you have any concerns. Yeah, can't hurt a quick little germination test. It's good data to have. Otherwise, I'm sure the seed library will kind of try to hopefully screen seed or test any potential seed that they're not sure about.
Yeah, I've just popped my email there into the chat. So Cheryl, if you want to just send me an email, we can certainly chat if you have some seeds that you'd like to donate, or anyone. That's my email. So please feel free to email if you have any questions about the seed library, or suggestions or connections or collaborations. We're really happy and open to be able to work with the community and shape this project into an idea and a solution that's going to work for the communities that are within the Northwest.
And I would love to hear too, just if you know anyone who's been saving seed for a long time in the area, or any varieties that you love to grow here that are harder and harder to find in the seed catalogs. Those are varieties that would be great to have in the seed library. You know, the seed companies are already growing like certain varieties, and sure, we could save the open pollinated that are in the seed catalogs, but it'd be great to also find kind of ones that folks in this area have been stewarding